Pathfinder Kingmaker is an intensely complex, long game. It's based on the tabletop RPG Pathfinder. Because of this, there are many rules, and character creation is both incredibly varied and detailed. You pick your race, your look, your sound, distribute your starting stat points, ability points, choose your class, which subclass you want in that class alignment, and you also choose what initial spells, proficiencies, and so on that you'd like depending on your chosen starting class. As you level up throughout the game, you also get to pick more, and the importance of what you pick varies. For example, if you're a caster, then when you level up, you sometimes get more spell slots, and you can pick what you learn from the list of spells. These spells are freebies, but you can also find and buy scrolls during play and copy them to your spellbook. Doing this lets you learn the spells just the same. Yet, some scrolls are harder to acquire in the game than others are, so what freebie spells you take on leveling up is still worth thinking about. There are also tons of combat options and dialogue affecting stats. So, for example, do you want to take Iron Will in a world where Fae and evil mages exist, since that stat helps shield your mind from mind-altering abilities? Or do you want to take a combat feat, which helps with teamwork? Or do you want to take a solo combat ability, such as two-weapon fighting? Maybe you want both eventually, but which would help you the most now? This is why going over the nuances of playing Pathfinder could easily make this review take up to an hour or more to explain in detail. And there are many ways to play. There are ranged attacks, melee attacks, alchemist bombs, spells that affect stats, restricting spells, offensive spells, terrain-altering spells such as grease, kineticist abilities, and so on. Some classes can even eventually turn into a dragon and fight using different types of breath weapons and physical attacks. Or you could play a cleric that can also fight. Your options are huge. The bottom line is that if you're into strategy and intense levels of character customization, then the gameplay for Pathfinder Kingmaker will deliver on that. The devs seem to have done a good job of porting over a pen and paper system. But this also means that it's worth planning out your character sheet in advance, much like you would for a tabletop RPG, because a poor build could lead to a poor experience. There are many build guides out there that could help, or at least be inspirational jumping off points for your own build. There's a huge spectrum of options here. A player can even multi-class if they want to. But if you'd still prefer trial and error and it doesn't go well, then you don't have to start over. It's possible to lower the difficulty level and to respec your character at an NPC called an Oriole. So there are safety nets in place for those who want to just cannonball into the pool and play. As for how it's delivered, the gameplay is done in real time, but you can tap the spacebar to pause the game during battle and issue commands whenever you want to. And if you don't like that, you can also set up points to auto-pause, such as when combat starts in the settings. And if you don't like that, then there's also a turn-based mode that you can turn on if you want to. Yet, despite all of this, I often found the gameplay tedious. There's a reason why GMs carefully structure their encounters. In video games, repetition is normal, but in a tabletop game, it's less so. Plus, repetitive encounters feel rather grinding during such a long game. The main content alone takes around 80 hours to finish. This means that while the combat isn't bad in and of itself, and some repetition is okay, streamlining the story would have helped make it more entertaining. Because while 80 hours is fine, I'm not complaining about how much content there is. At the same point, making stuff mandatory instead of optional, it can feel grinding. Normally, with grinding in games, taking a break now and then would help ease any boredom. But unfortunately, here, breaks aren't a great solution. It's one of those games where if you load a save a while later, you can wind up very confused about what's going on, how, where, when, and why. There's a quest list, which helps, but it's definitely not going to cover everything. There's a lot going on in the story. Going over the story in detail would require many spoilers though, because there are many places, characters, events, and bits of lore all going on at once. When I first played, it was a while back and I was intrigued by this. So I went the completionist route and I played at a leisurely pace. That took me about 327 hours. I got many rare achievements, explored nooks, crannies, and dialogue trees. Obviously, this means that I learned the story rather well, but unfortunately, I I was disappointed by it. The best way that I can describe how it felt? Imagine unwrapping dozens and dozens of beautifully wrapped gift boxes, and each one is either empty or some lame trinket is inside. It would have been better just to look, think the stack was pretty, and keep moving. Similarly, it's best not to pry deeply into the story. It's better to leave the details to your own imagination, because the story often seems to have more to it than it actually does. I went completionist only because I was under the illusion that things and options existed that didn't. Eventually, I did some data mining out of frustration and discovered that certain options just don't exist in the game at all. And yet some really stupid options do. For example, there's a secret ending, and I really disliked it. Basically, if you choose cheesy, thirsty dialogue options, then you can get a happy ending with a homicidal, yet pretty NPC. A general attitude of, "You are so hot, so I forgive you instantly," is also necessary because many NPCs and your own party get terribly hurt by this individual. There's a theme of forgiveness there, but it's contradictory because another NPC has to be hurt by the player to get this secret happy ending, and that other NPC has a similar reason for acting badly too. Yet there's no happy ending for this other person, no forgiveness possible. The whole thing was confusingly lame. Meanwhile, another character inevitably becomes soulbound to something, and there is no way to save that character. It's a major plot point, but it seemed artificial in context, as if it was meant to make me sad, but instead all it did was annoy me, and it also had rather horrific implications for how the gods viewed life, and when they'd intervene or not. In fact, the gods in general are another big problem. They seemed lame, and that was weird too. In context, they made the entire setting feel kind of awkward and strange. This is because these deities are a prevalent presence. Several different gods and goddesses are mentioned throughout the game. Your party members follow some of them, and several deities do have major effects on some subplots. Yet, the way people view these gods doesn't make sense in context. It's one thing to give a god or goddess flaws, but another to have every single person in a world ignore those flaws entirely. That's what was weird. For instance, Sarenrae is supposed to be a goddess that's all about light, love, and forgiveness. However, her behavior's sus. She brainwashes heroes to turn them into her angels and then punishes them if they act like confused children, which seems really stupid, considering that a confused childlike adult is what you'll get if you wipe away all of a person's life experience. Punishing them for that is odd. You can find that out if you ask someone later on about how her angels are made. You also find out that in Pathfinder lore, she wrecked a city because her own followers misunderstood some vague instructions of hers. As a result of her vagueness, they got corrupted and then did something that upset her, even though they had originally intended to please her. And then this goddess of mercy and forgiveness had a bit of an angry oopsie that resulted in mass death and horrible roaming monstrosities. And I can get that gods and goddesses can have their personality problems, just look at Greek mythology. However, in Pathfinder Kingmaker, it just felt really odd because of the context. I brought up Sarenrae specifically because she's supposed to be the nicest deity. Someone in your party does follow her, and you have to regularly hear about how great she is. She's the healing light, the dawn flower, so forgiving. Various NPCs praise her highly, and so do in-game books on the world's lore. Yet, despite all of it, even she comes off badly. Hearing only praise for this goddess of light and love, in light of her hugely disturbing behavior, felt ridiculous to me. Like if Zeus were only praised as a loving father. It's like, okay, she may have a nice side, but brainwashing people into children and then punishing them for being children and cleaving the world when she's angry, that doesn't seem like forgiving should be a main interpretation. Kinda seems like atheism should be a more popular thing if that's the nicest deity too. And I couldn't even voice those kinds of opinions strongly in game or find anyone who did, because everybody was fanboying and fangirling over the gods. Eventually, I just wanted to go party with the Fae. And these are just some of the many odd pitfalls in the story. If you don't look too deeply, then the story's not so bad, because these pitfalls either aren't discovered or seem smaller than they are. So I recommend just sticking to the main plotline. It is worth noting that the NPC companions are well done though, because having them around does make the game better, so their subplots are worthwhile to do. The companions that can join your party have a decent amount of depth to them. They're voiced well, they banter.
So I pick up my clothes this morning and see some pictures embroidered on it. pine trees, clouds, an owlbear fighting a troll. Spill it out, who did that?
I confess, it was I. I only meant to patch them up a bit, and got a little carried away.
They have many dialogue options, and romances are also possible. How you treat them matters at some points in the story too. You don't have to use them though. You can make your own companions by hiring custom companions from Enorial, the same NPC who lets you respec. However, I think that a player would miss out on a lot by skipping over the companions. Lastly, there's the kingdom management. I wasn't sure when to bring that up in the review and it sucks, so I figured I'd bring that up last. You can automate it, but it's a large part of the game and some events are timed. You essentially just have to babysit your kingdom and order your advisors to handle this or that problem, opportunity, research, whatever. Whether or not they succeed is up to a dice roll, but some NPCs have a greater chance of success than others. At some points, an event will cause them to speak with you. In that case, the advisor will offer you a specific choice along the lines of agree with me or disagree with me. But disagreeing with them too much causes them to quit on you. You also can build buildings to increase your kingdom's stats, such as loyalty, so that revolts don't ruin your kingdom, but it all felt kind of tacked on and dull. It also wasn't well thought out. I mean, I didn't feel much like a queen when my advisors could throw tantrums, quit, and I didn't have a plethora of new candidates to choose from. It seemed as if people should have been jumping at the chance for prestigious positions, especially since the kingdom was new, which meant that fortunes and reputations were being newly minted. Just look at how many people want cabinet and advisor positions in today's governments. In a medieval setting with a brand new kingdom, it seemed as if that desire for prestige should have been even stronger. The look and the sound. For an isometric RPG, the graphics are good. The character icons are also well drawn, but I dislike the cutscenes. The cutscenes are just drawn static pages, but they had several issues. Sometimes they showed characters who weren't yet recruited, which was glitchy. At other points, it seemed as if there was an oversight. A character had an older design in the artwork and didn't look like the current NPC in my party. And at all times, the PC was portrayed as a dark-haired, armored human male. I've played as both a human woman with light hair and an elven woman with dark hair, and neither were reflected in the cutscene art. Suddenly seeing a random dude with my companions and my own PC X'd out of the story was odd and affected my sense of immersion. The soundtrack was a solid positive though. It was detailed, pleasant, and fit the game well. It consistently set the mood for what was going on, and it's a bit shy of 2 hours long. Given the length of the game, I think the fact that it always sounded pleasant says a lot about the soundtrack's quality. The music definitely added to the game in a positive way. And on the sound note, I also did enjoy the voice acting. Altogether, despite my disappointment with the story's pitfalls and the game's flaws, I still lean towards liking it a bit. The companions and setting are interesting. The gameplay is varied and nuanced, which I think is great. But I also think it's the kind of thing that most people will either really like or really hate, and combat is a big part of the game. So if you're interested, I recommend checking out a Let's Play to see if the combat is something you'd enjoy.